Welcome back, everybody, to the edition, the 5.1 week, which is a week 5.1, 2014 edition of Headlines and Beyond on iNN. My name is Dr. Daniel Karras, and I'm going to be here providing you with a view on the news that is not seen anywhere else. You can't find this anywhere else. I've gone through 30, 40 different sources, and nobody does the analysis in the manner that I do it in. They'll have bits and pieces, but they won't bring everything together. And that's because each journalist has their own particular view, and a lot of times journalists, when they're working for major companies or they're working for the government, are forced into a particular view that is in line with the government view, the corporate view, or whatever view that they subscribe to. I'm an independent. I don't really have a particular view. And you'll find that if you go to my background, you'll find that this is actually indeed true, that I don't hold any specific loyalties to any one particular group. And that when I do have a loyalty or a particular bias, that it allows me, my biases allow me to actually be open, so I can actually go and explore things. I can, be more, if you will, open-minded about things. And so our title for this week is still Putin Rapes Christ. And the reason for this narrative is we're going to try, because I've learned that media does help. Journalism is a weapon. You can change the world with journalism, and make a difference. And it's not you're fighting with words. You're fighting with the ideas, but nonetheless, if you get enough people behind it, if you get enough of the right narrative, you can change things for the better. And this is where, rather than building an army, this is, for me, the best way about going about making world changes. And you'll see this as we go along. This is the thing is, these videos, Headlines and Beyond, are not isolated videos. They're going to be connected to other videos. They're going to be connected to other episodes. Episode to episode, everything is connected. And there are going to be documentaries coming out of this as well. So there'll be documentaries, you'll be able to go and do more referencing in there. And it's not going to be your standard news broadcast. Most times you can sit back and watch a standard news broadcast, you put your feet up and relax. Here it's going to be different. This is for those who really want to know what's going on. That means it's research. We're going to go into international diplomacy, foreign relations, foreign policy, and we will be getting eventually into economics and see how economics wraps into this entire thing as well. But right now, that's way ahead of where we're going to be right now, where we are right now. So right now is fighting propaganda with journalism, changing the world with journalism, and this is what Putin Rapes Christ is about in terms of this edition. What happens is that all narratives, all country or political narratives have a beginning. They're not simply out there. Politics is basically a set or a group of ethics. After the ethics, once you have your ethics, you now have your laws. But people wonder, well, what's behind the ethics? And behind the ethics is your morality, and then behind the morality is theology. So the fundamental core is theology, the idea of God, and this includes the idea of not God, right? So atheism is a theology because, well, it doesn't say believes in God, it talks about that particular topic and provides a definition, if you will, a sort of broad-based definition. And then you start refining into morals, ethics, and then constitution and law, and then from there on out your practices. And because this is the case, we can look at things like rape and war and sex slaves from the perspective of the theological and moral backgrounds. And the thing is, this is something you're not going to see on any news press. Most news broadcasts will not mention morality at all. They've gotten to the point where they fundamentally believe, a lot of people believe, that there are multiple truths, multiple moralities, and that everything is okay. We just have to be sort of ethical. And when you sit down and look at what they mean by that and what the consequences are, you'll find that a lot of this whole sex trade, the sex trade, the sex slaves, rape and war, are all connected to this so-called plural morality, where there are a lot of different truths. So you can be upset about someone being raped, but at the same time, if someone has the moral that, well, sex is okay and that's simply a state of mind, and that the woman who gets raped should just realize that this is sex, and there's no big deal, and sort of just get over it. Well, that's all right too, because it's part of this whole pluralistic narrative. But I'll show you that this isn't the case. I'll show you what happens, and we're going to be using India as an example, because India is an example of a very old pluralistic society. We're going to take a look at what's going on in India and see and compare how there is an observable amount of evidence that will show us where, demonstrably, will show us where morality is good and where morality is bad. In other words, what's right and what's wrong. In other words, what's wrong hurts us. It causes pain. It damages things. And we're going to look at these different things. And this is going to be part of the background narrative of Headlines and Beyond. And we're going to wrap this into a lot of the headlines. And this includes not only Putin raised Christ, because as an Orthodox Christian, they are the fundamental. The Orthodox Christians are the fundamental Christians. That's what the Christianity is supposed to be. The ones who call themselves fundamentalists are not fundamental Christians. In order to be fundamental Christians, you have to be back at the time of Christ, not 1800 AD, which is your evangelicals, not the Roman Catholic Church, which is basically the papacy, which is essentially 1000 AD. You have to be back at the original point of Christ. And the point of Christ is that you see Christ being crucified on the cross, not because he had to, but because he was demonstrating for Christians that this is the way to be, that you're supposed to be peaceful even unto death. Because for a Christian, a real Christian, death is not real. It's an illusion. And there is a beyond death for a Christian. So if you're a real Christian and you're following Christ, then there is a beyond death. There is a beyond your execution. And so there is nothing really to fear. Yeah, and then this is the statement here, but I think while this is a good narrative, and and a lot, I do believe it to a certain degree. But again, there's certain things. There's a phrase that says things are easier said than done. In other words, yes, this is what we're supposed to do. This is the way we're supposed to feel, but that's not always the way we feel. And what we can do, and this is sort of what evolves out of this, is the relationship that you have. Again, this is dealt within theology. The relationship that you have with God or not a God will often determine what you are allowed to or are not allowed to do, and how you approach everyday life. And so in this, we're also going to look at Allah's perverts, the Christian wrong, which was the Christian realm. Now calling them the Christian realm because they are not actually Christians themselves. We're going to go into and start deconstructing the New World Order, Illuminati, and conspiracy theories to find out what makes them tick and how they work. And again, most shows, most news broadcasts won't even touch this stuff, but we are. We're going to look at how Ferguson relates to Abu Ghraib and the infamous Stanford University experiment done by Philip Zimbardo. We'll see how all these things sort of interrelate, and that Ferguson is in this context. It's not a racial issue. It is a policing power issue. Then you have the Israeli Nazis and the emergence of the Israeli Nazi Party. And again, not heard anywhere else. We're going to deal with it here. And this is it. We're going to go into the in our examination of the psychology of evil. We're going to go into morality, and this, in our particular look at the psychology of evil, where we are right now, is we're going to look at rape and war and sex slaves, and we're going to see how these things all evolve and where things are going from here on out in terms of where the trending path is. And we'll show how various different political ideologies and theories will move things in one direction or the other. Right now, most political ideologies and theologies are pointing things to make things worse, not better. And I'll show you why this is. Anyways, let's get on with our headlines. The big major headline that's in the news almost all the time is ISIS. And I'm going to be sort of looking at this and looking at this from the perspective of what's actually occurring beyond in ISIS. ISIS is a false, as many people on the internet will tell you, is a false flag operation, and it is a false flag operation. Why? Because ISIS was created by the United States and Israel. There are very specific narratives and reasons why they want to do this. And it's not that they went out there and hands-on created it. They created the conditions and then sort of nudged things together. And that's the way sort of a lot of clandestine work works, is you're not actually hands-on specifically. You have somewhat of a hands-on approach. You're doing things behind the scenes, and you're slowly nudging things into the direction you want to go in. So it's not, and this is the problem with conspiracies. Conspiracies view things as hard and fast and very rigid. Real life geopolitics is extremely fluid. Just because someone is initially listed as your enemy doesn't mean behind the scenes you're not working with them to do or achieve some common interest or goal. And this is the case here. And then this is why I'm going to term ISIS here. What's going on in Iraq and ISIS right now? I'm going to give this the term John McCain's Guide to Starting a War, because this is exactly what's happening here. This is the United States creating the narrative for war. Obama gets to look good for the Republicans. He gets to have his big day as a military leader, flexing his military muscle. He also gets to look, because he comes up and says he's saving these people, so he becomes the savior of these people. In other words, he's creating a narrative in history for himself. But this narrative is actually false. And the thing is, we're going to look at this and see why this is a false narrative. We'll understand. We're going to go in and unravel and look at the lies that go to constructing this false narrative. Because the thing is, they're saying, well, this is self-defense. These people, they're helpless. We need to help them. And we saw this on Anderson Cooper. Anderson Cooper and John McCain worked together. John McCain was on Anderson Cooper many times, right? And this was seen as a bipartisan left-right alliance. Right? Because Anderson Cooper, who is gay, I'm actually going to use the term homosexual here because that's the proper terminology. So let's use the term homosexual because that's what he is. And so homosexuals are primarily on the left, and John McCain is a Republican from the right. So here you have a left-right coalition, a left-right bipartisanship, and they're trying to say, how everyone's working together. And the narrative of this story that they're working together on is they're trying to save the people of Syria. And they show you images, which often turned out to be false. If you actually did the background research and checked where the images actually came from, they were false, just like the images that was presented for Iraq. They were falsified, they were faked. And we had, in many cases, if you followed what was going on, if you actually did the background research into where the media came from, they were coming from jihadist sites. And there's no way that McCain, who actually has a major intelligence background, his background is military intelligence. He's CIA. He's got that connection there. There's no way that he didn't know that these were jihadist videos. So right away, he's spinning these videos as Bashir's army attacking his own people. No, and that's not the case. And this will be demonstrated here. What occurred in the beginning of Syria will be demonstrated very clearly here by events that are going on in the media right now. Headlines are connected, both history and in history, and present a future direction for understanding what's going to happen next. Anyways, I'll see you on the other side of our break. And when we come back, we're going to get into stripping back the headlines and understanding how John McCain started this war in Syria and Iraq. He reignited it. Alrighty, take it easy.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Alrighty, we're back. We have a bit of an issue here because we're going to try to peel this back. And we can look at this in the news. Just recently, on December 7th, there was reports in the headlines. One of the major headlines was Israeli airstrikes in Syria. In other words, Israel went and bombed certain sites in Syria, and the defense minister came out and said, we need to prevent arms transfers to militants. In other words, they used the excuse that Hezbollah, which is aligned with Syria, or supposedly aligned with Syria anyways, we don't actually know if they are actually aligned with Syria, but they appear to be aligned with Syria, but appearances can be deceiving. And the thing is that if you look into the history of Hezbollah, they're primarily a defense force. But there are other issues that you can deal, that you can sort of nitpick and go into with Hezbollah and sort of say, well, okay, things need to be improved here. But for the most part, a lot of the militants doing things, the jihadists, who are doing stuff, that's not Hezbollah. Hezbollah has not sort of crossed that line, and neither may I say has Hamas. Has crossed the line and see what we're doing with ISIS, with Al Qaeda. They haven't crossed that line. They haven't been doing the things that we see with Al Qaeda and ISIS and a lot of other sort of fundamentalist groups. It's not necessarily that they're not fundamentalists. They have yet to cross that line. And so this is what the Israeli intelligence minister was talking about, how Israel's policy of preventing arms transfer to militant groups, and this is what they were doing with the airstrikes. But the Syrian army comes up and says, well, no, the Israeli army is our enemy, and that they've been striking at targets to help the militant groups. In other words, that Israel and the United States are working to help ISIS. But not that they are working to help ISIS. And I'll demonstrate this. The United States and Israel created ISIS. And you'll see that this argument here will go and sort of knock down the walls here and find out exactly what's happening. So right now you have a strike on the airport. You have a strike by the Israeli Air Force on Bashir's military organization. December 5th, just 2 days before, ISIS militants have launched an attack overnight on a major military air base. And what did Israel strike at? They struck at air bases. In other words, you see a coordination here in terms of operations between Israel and ISIS. And this may say, oh wow, this is just one thing. But there's more. There's more to this. And the thing is, they said activists, and they're talking about these sort of human rights activists who were in Syria doing the observations. Said ISIS looked like to push to eliminate the last significant government outpost in the extreme extreme. In other words, they're trying to break up Syria. And if you look at the history of warfare, and particularly if you're trying to go after oil and resources, and there's oil and resources in Syria, the history of the United States and Israel, and this includes Europe as well, is to break up a country, break up the area, and create what they call tiny little caliphs. In other words, you create a dictatorship that rules tiny areas, and because the dictatorship is so small, they need your support. So in other words, they're creating puppets. So they want to create puppet states. And ISIS is one of the ways to do that. You want to break down something, you send in you send in the destruction crew. For the communists and both the Nazis, these are your socialists, they use anarchists. Anarchists go into the streets. They're the ones burning and looting buildings. You see what's going on in Ferguson. Well, that's anarchy. Those are the anarchists. And these things are planned. They don't simply occur. They're planned. And they're designed to break down the establishment is there so that something new can be inserted. And this is what we see going on in Syria. We're seeing this exact same thing going on in Syria. We see that prior to this whole incident popping up in 2011, that there was an announcement that the oil was found in Syria, that they had significant stocks, and all of a sudden now you start having these. All of a sudden you start having this conflict breakout. And it was sort of, again, John McCain and Anderson Cooper and came up, oh, we're protecting the Syrian people. Well, that's not it. If you look at what's happening with ISIS, this 2011, go back to the 2011 narrative and see what was going on. ISIS hadn't appeared yet. ISIS was, at 2011, was the Free Syrian Army. And you saw all the same videos, the explosions and everything going on, done by ISIS. But now they were called, but back then they were called the Free Syrian Army. Right? And ISIS is the proof of U.S.-Israeli support for this war in Syria. That they created this whole thing. So we can actually go in and see this. And what do we see? We go to the actual statistics. You go back to the United Kingdom. We saw all these sort of these British human rights activists in there. And there is a narrative for the human rights activists. Human rights activists, they're kind of hippie-ish, like they have a style to them, but so do military agents have a cachet to them. They have a style. And when you look at the people interviewed who were so-called human rights observers, they had shaved military heads. They were wearing military jackets that we shoot from. You could look. They looked and acted like military agents. They didn't act like NGOs, but like humanitarians. And what we see here is that from the United Kingdom's own records, from the UK's own records, they said some 2,000 Britons have traveled to Syria and Iraq to fight for ISIS. Right? The UN's report, 15,000 foreign fighters have joined the Syrian. They call it now the Syrian Civil War, as if this thing kind of popped out of its own. Right? And the thing is that they have in the article that this was in one of the articles, right? The Syrian Civil War has been raging since 2011. Israel launched a series of airstrikes inside Syria since the outbreak of the country's armed uprising in 2000. In other words, what you see as the Free Syrian Army, as ISIS and these other groups formed, you saw Israel coordinating strikes that benefited these different groups like ISIS, who were at that time called the Syrian they were the Free Syrian Army. And so what you have is you see the construction of the narrative for war. And why are they doing this? Well, you'll find out that Netanyahu is an Israeli Nazi. He believes in a Jewish master race, and that everybody else who are goyim are basically insignificant. And that this isn't something that I've stated. This is what you can find this in the Israeli journal Haaretz. And I'll be pointing this out in a bit here. And the thing is, so you see that a lot of these people who went over there were military agents, including from France, they're from Britain, from Germany, from all over the place. And the thing is that 15,000 is the report from the UN or 15,000 was a lowball estimate. In other words, they were very conservative with the number. They feel that there's a lot more there. And what do you have? You have the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. This is the one who reports and monitors the conflict, right? They're based in Britain. A lot of the people they show on the air interviewing, they're military type people. They have shaved heads. They've got the military attitude. And the thing is that we look at, and this actually comes from October 26th from a Russian news organization. What do you have here? You have Islamic militants fired chlorine-filled shells on residents on a residential district in Iraq's western Anbar province, and this actually got out to the rest of the media, so you can find this all over the media, right? And the thing is that what you found out is you're seeing here. Wait a minute here. This sounds familiar, and you found if you go back through the 2000, the beginning part of the beginning of the Syrian conflict, the Syrian issue, or the Syrian war, you'll find that they were blaming Bashir for the chemical strikes. But the thing is, again, they had no proof of this. They were simply showing random photos of chemical weapons. They actually didn't, when they came down to saying, well, where's your proof to show that Bashir had actually used chemical weapons? They couldn't prove it. They couldn't find any proof. Nothing was found. What was found was that somebody had fired chemical weapons. But here we go. Here we are now, 4 years later, 2014, and what's happening? Well, that's 13 years from now. I think 13 years later. 2011, 3 years later, and we find the Islamic State, these people who were funded by the United States, who they're armed with American weaponry. And the United States says, we have no idea how they got them. Yeah, well, we do know how they got them. They were funded by Senator John McCain and Obama. They were funded by these people. And the thing is that here we are now, 3-4 years later, and who's using the chemical weapons? The very groups that were the Free Syrian Army. We see what they've been doing. If you go look at what came out of this, the evils that ISIS is doing, the rapes, the sex slaves. We know that way back then, when we were seeing all these atrocities that were being blamed on Bashir, that these atrocities weren't being done by Bashir. They were being done by ISIS. Because the Free Syrian Army, who is ISIS, or was ISIS was the Free Syrian Army. They were all there. They were doing this work. Because we see it now. We see what's going on. And then there are other groups, but they're not, you're not told in the news groups, there are other groups out there. There's not simply ISIS. There are a variety of groups that are very violent like this. And the thing is, the ones who really reported that that you had chlorine-filled shells, and this is a chlorine mustard gas, it comes from actually from a Middle Eastern news a news agency called Kabaranet News Agency. I have to go look up the more better on the internet and sort of find out who they are, do a background on them, and then go from there. Who else is objecting to what's going on in Iraq and Syria? Well, Ron Paul's come up and said this is immoral, this is illegal. It talked about these things, and he's actually done this again. This wasn't shown in American media. This was over the last week or so. Didn't show up in American and European media at all. And the other thing that really didn't show up on the American the American and European media is the news from Israel, from the journal Haaretz, the online journal from Haaretz. They didn't talk about the creation of the Israeli second-class citizen, the Arab Israeli. They didn't talk about the Jewish New York's Jewish Theological Seminary head saying that he's alarmed by the Jewish nation-state bill, who actually comes out and said Chancellor Arnold Eisen urges Israeli parliamentarians not to relegate countries' minorities to second-class status, right? The next quote on this, and I had gone over this before, the nation-state bill, Jews, and this is again from the lines from Haaretz, some of the headlines from Haaretz, Jews should know exactly where it leads. One need not be a historian to see the resemblance between the controversial bill and the nation and the nationality laws of 1930s Europe. They're talking about fascism. They're talking about the introduction of Nazism, right in here. Anyways, on the other side, we're going to come back. We're going to take a look at continue taking a look at the Israeli Nazi issue and how this plays into the narrative with ISIS. Because again, I said ISIS is created by Israel and the United States. It is the cause for the United States to create a war in there, to break up that whole region and get at the oil, get at the resources, because they need these caliphates, they need these tiny dictatorships in order to rule, and they need these they need these puppet governments. You can't have a puppet government over a large area the way Syria is. You need them in smaller, broken up areas. And this is exactly what they did in Yugoslavia. Anyways, we'll be back.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back, everybody. We're on the other side of the break here. And you see in these articles from Perverts, and they even mention this last quote here. It says, "Welcome diaspora Jews to the Israel you've been avoiding for too long. Diaspora Jews have been defending an imaginary Israel. The real one looks much more like the one described in the controversial nation-state bill." In other words, they're talking about the nation-state nationalism, National Socialism. That's Nazism. That's a Nazi bill. In other words, Netanyahu, because he's on the Israeli right, is fundamentally a Nazi Jew. He's an Israeli and he's a Nazi. He believes in a superior Zionist Jewish master race, just the way that the Germans did. And what they're doing now is they're implementing the exact same things that Germany did for the Aryan race. Netanyahu is now enacting for the Jewish race, for the Zionists. And people say, "Oh, you're talking about the Zionist conspiracy theory. Don't you know?" Well, then there's arguments on both sides for the Zionist conspiracy theory, and there's arguments against the Zionist conspiracy theory. Each of them are in many ways their own conspiracy theorists. But once again, if you look into their own the history of Judaica, you actually go look at the Jewish books. You start reading, you learn a little bit of Hebrew, and you start going into the books and start learning what they're about. You'll find that there is in the kosher laws that Jews are not supposed to be in contact with anyone who's not Jewish. In other words, if you're not Jewish, you're not kosher, they're not supposed to have contact with you. And you can see this in you go to New York, go into Brooklyn, and to look at the Hasidic community, and what you'll find that on Saturdays you'll find streets you can't go down. And not only you can't go down those streets, the Jews themselves are broken up into schools. They're not unified. And this has always been like that. You go to the Dead Sea Scroll and you'll find that the Jews are written by a group of Jews called Essenes. There were another group, if you talk about the Jesus of Nazareth, right? It's not because he was from the town of Nazareth. It's because he was a Nazarene. A Nazarene was another Jewish group just like the Essenes. And you'll find that throughout history, whether they're Essenes, whether they're Nazarenes, whether they're Pharisees, or Levite, or Kohanes, that Jews have always had not a homogeneous society, but a heterogeneous society. That they were very mixed, and they weren't of one mind. You go into the Israeli media, right? And this monolithic view of Israel being of one mind completely disappears. There are a lot of different views in Israel. And this is why, if you to go in and understand the Israeli narrative, the Israeli story, you have to look into Israel. You can't simply talk about Israel and what the Jews are like without going into the Israeli media, going into Israeli sources, and finding what they're all about. And there are too many of the conspiracy theorists who talk about the Zionist conspiracy theory don't do this. They only look at the narrative of what they see in North American media. Well, the North American media, we know is tilted. We know that it is blind and filtered. So you're not going to get the whole story. If you want to get the whole story, you have to dig behind the scenes. You have to go to the original sources. So in other words, if you want to looking at a Jew, you want to find he's supporting Israel. You want to find out where he sits in this sort of Israeli voice spectrum. You have to go into the Israeli sources. You have to go into the Israeli media and find out exactly what's going on. See where this person sits. And you'll find out as you do that this person does not have the single common view of Israel. That you'll find that there are multiple narratives for Israel. There are multiple views for Israel. And all of a sudden, once you see that there are multiple views, this whole concept of a Zionist conspiracy falls apart. But one of the things that is interesting is you have in the American media Ron Paul again coming up and saying that the war propaganda is heating up in the United States again to sell the latest war. They want to sell this war in Iraq and Syria. They want to Obama wants to re-engage in Syria again and in Iraq. Here's the thing is they're talking about re-engaging. They said we have to go into Iraq because of ISIS now, right? But the same thing, we actually have to go into Syria as well because that's where ISIS is. Well, this is a pretext to invade Syria. They're going back into Iraq so that they can invade Syria. Boots on the ground. And they're trying to sell this war. And this is what Ron Paul's talking about. And he says the propaganda in the media, again, with Anderson Cooper and John McCain and in a bipartisan stance, are now ramping up the rhetoric for war. They're beating the war drums again. This is the call to war. This is the push of the nation into war. This is what's going on with Senator John McCain and Anderson Cooper. And they're bringing up the government's narrative from Obama that they want to go to war and they want to go to war in Syria. They want to, and again, they're presenting this as a moral thing. They're presenting it as something that is good. They're going in to protect people from ISIS. Well, without actually telling people that they actually created ISIS. If people knew that ISIS was the Free Syrian Army, they wouldn't be able to go out and say, well, yeah, yes, we funded ISIS, but yeah, we also armed them to all those weapons that they have there, those sophisticated weapons. We gave them to them. We funded it. But we still need to go in there and fight them anyways. Because we need to go in and also take out Bashir. And this was, if the American people actually knew this and understood this, there wouldn't be a narrative for war. But they don't know this. They don't understand this. This has been completely left out of the mainstream media. It is not talked about on a regular basis. None of this analysis shows up. And so what now you have is people talking about war in Iraq and Syria now, going back in Iraq and Syria, going back into Afghanistan, and finishing the job that was supposed to be done. Well, no, that's not what's happening here. What they're doing is they're starting a new war, and they're trying to sell it. This is the sales pitch, the bipartisan sales pitch of going to war. And this is how you. This is Senator, because this is Senator John McCain's baby. This is Senator John McCain's narrative on how to start a war. And this is what he's a warmonger. Before he wasn't a chicken hawk. Before he ran for president, he wasn't a chicken hawk. This last time he ran for president, something happened. He changed, and now he's become a chicken hawk. He's become exactly like Hillary Clinton, who is a neocon. He's become he's joined the neocon group, and they're now pushing for war. And it seems like, to a certain degree, that the public opinion is changing and that it's shifting. But the thing is that we can see that it doesn't always have to. The thing is, this is where we go into the political timeline of Ukraine and see that in Ukraine, they're doing the exact same thing in Ukraine that they're doing in Syria. And that Ukraine actually follows the same narrative that was what happened in Bosnia, and in Kosovo, and in all of Yugoslavia. When they broke up Yugoslavia, it broke up into all these different wars. And we had the rape and war, we had the massacres, we had the sex. It was in the papers. The Albanian gangs going into the refugee camps and picking up girls and taking them out of there. And if you look into again, if you look at the historical report, you will find sexual abuse problems with the UN. That a lot of these pedophile groups, these organized crime groups that sold sex slaves, operate openly within the UN organizations, within the NGOs. This is known about. It's just been swept under the carpet. And so when they come up with these laws, they say, oh, we're going to deal with rape in Africa, we're going to deal with rape and war. They're not going below and looking at what was done in history. They're not blaming themselves. They're not looking at the problems they've created, and they're simply dealing with an icing. They're trying to avoid the issues themselves and sort of just do a gloss over, and nothing ever really changes. As a matter of fact, it's the worst that's ever been. And the thing is, this is what's been stated from India. And then who has come up and said that the foreign policy is a major mistake? Well, just last week, Henry Kissinger stood up and said, "Hey, this is wrong. This is a mistake, and it shouldn't be happening." We haven't gone fully into a Cold War yet with Russia, but we're starting to go into another Cold War. And the thing is, there's no guarantee at this time, because we're the aggressors, that we're going to win. Right? And it has major implications for what's going on. Europe is going to end up destroying itself. And we see that this whole factor, the oil factor that's going on here, we see this in Yugoslavia. We see if we back in history, what's going on in Ukraine, what happened in Yugoslavia, because there's a pattern with Yugoslavia, then Ukraine. But what do we see? We see this with under Hitler with the Operation Barbarossa when they moved into the Russian front. We see this under Napoleon, who tried to invade Russia twice. So you see that Europe has always, historically, tried to invade Russia. In other words, Ukraine is Russia. If you know the Russian history, you know that Ukraine is Russia. And there is no differentiation between the two. What you've had now is you had years, more than 100 years worth of invasions. And so it's not fully Russian anymore in terms of the mixture of the people, but they were Russians. You're just sort of seeing the aggression that Europe has had. Right? I mean, Ron Paul is sort of trying to get the United States to put some sanctions on Israel, because Israel gets $3 billion a year in aid from the United States. But the thing is that his narrative, the stories here, a lot of these stories that I'm reading from, which come from AP, they come from RT, they come from the Russian news, they come from the Middle Eastern Al Jazeera news, they come from CNN, they come from Fox. What are they missing? They're missing the whole narrative here that people want this to happen. That these people want these things. It's not that Israel, if Israel's too dependent on the United States, they're not dependent on the United States. They're using the United States. The United States is an asset to Israel. Again, this is left out. And the thing is, it's also the morality. Why is it immoral is left out. We look at the report on the two teenage girls who left to join the Islamic terrorist group ISIS. Right? Within 5 months, they had disappeared. And they think, they were fighting on the front lines. No, they weren't fighting on the front lines. Understand that where the position is for women in Islamic society. They're there to give birth to the children of ISIS. They're there as concubines. What do you think the whole thing of the 42 virgins for the martyrs is? It's rape and war. It's the brothel. Islamic beliefs include a heavenly brothel, a brothel run by a pimp god. Allah, and this is what I'm talking about, Allah's perverts, is a pimp society. They're a pimp religion. They're a religion of sexualization. This is part of the religion. And the girls, the last names are pretty much Slavic. So the only way you would have a Slavic girl going into these situations here is if they were Bosnians. So once again, you have the Bosnians being caught in the middle of a war, and they're being shipped off to ISIS to become concubines, to become prostitutes for the male Islamists, for the jihadists. And that's exactly what happened. They found one girl was pregnant. The other girl has disappeared. Whoa, what happened? They weren't killed in battle. How in battle do you get pregnant? Within 5 months of being there. They were raped. They were sold a story that they're going to go help out in the front line. They're going to help free the Syrian society. They got tricked into going. There were groups within their society, within their own people, within their own mosques and stuff like that, who were able to get the tickets, to buy them, to pay for the tickets, to do all the paperwork, to make sure that all their paperwork is in order so they can travel. Because these girls were minors, they couldn't really travel on their own, so they needed to have somebody with them. They probably didn't travel alone, they probably traveled in groups. And it was probably billed as a sightseeing trip or a group trip to a particular country. And they were duped. They ended up being taken and being used as sex slaves. And we have from the Times of India a story of one girl who was held captive, and she was allowed to be interviewed, so her parents would know exactly the horrors that she suffered. And this is the part. Here's this. This part of me would like to die immediately, to sink beneath the ground and stay there. But the other part of me still hopes to be saved and to be able to hug my parents once more. This girl said, they threaten us, they beat us if we try to resist. Often I wish they would beat me so hard I would die. But they're cowards, and even in this, none of them have the courage and are suffering. What they're talking about? They're being raped on a regular basis. This is what's going on. And this leads us into the understanding of what Islam is, and into the Indian times, and using India as a narrative to understand what happens with morality. When morality is compromised, this is what happens. See you on the other side.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We've took a bit of a break, and we're talking about the girl who was allowed to be interviewed by ISIS, by Western media, and this particularly was done by Indian media. It was actually done by Indian media. It appeared in the Times of India, and there was actually a lot of stories that don't make the American press, the European press, that make it into the Indian news media. And there's stories like this of what's actually happening to the girls in ISIS, and this is what would happen to the girls who ran off and joined ISIS. They would have become part of the concubines, the Islamic concubines. They would be there for the privilege and the use of the male jihadists. There are no female jihadists. This whole argument of a female jihadist is a lie. They're tricking these girls and simply using them as weapons. And then as we see here, this is the latest headlines that came out, I think just 2 days ago. No, it was last night actually. It was, I think it was around on December 8th. ISIS has beheaded 4 Christian children in Iraq for refusing to convert to Islam. And I said, "Wow, that's so horrible." But look, if you look into the Christian history prior to 800 AD, when the Muslims are coming in between 600 and 800 AD, you'll find this is exactly what happened. This stuff that ISIS is doing is nothing new. It is not unique to Islam. It is historical. You go into India, right? Here's a story in India. This is from just this week. A Hindu-Muslim couple recently married was slain Saturday morning. Their families were their families were neighbors to a Hapur village, I'm assuming a Muslim village, right? The woman's kin had opposed the marriage. The couple was slain because the brothers of the woman felt that the marriage was wrong, and they went in there and they slit their throats. And here, the bottom part of the article says, "This is the 5th incident of honor killing in a week in this region." In other words, this stuff. There's a Muslim honor killing. This is a 5th incident in a week. That's almost daily. In other words, daily in India, Muslims kill their own children, their own wives, and these honor killings on a day-to-day basis. This is not part of ISIS. These are day-to-day Muslim. This is Islam. What's going on in ISIS is not unique. It is not some way whacked out thing. This is standard what's going on. This is why I choose to use India as our model of a pluralistic society with pluralistic morals, because that's what India is. India has allowed all these groups, because they've been there India's been around for more than 2,000 years. And so they've allowed these groups to sort of stay there as they are. They haven't been able. They didn't go in and say your morality is wrong. Your morality is wrong. Because of the Hindu nature, all these moralities have truths to them. And this is where you get this whole concept of multiple truths. And it's a pluralistic thing. Well, if you have multiple truths and you're allowing things to happen, well, this is what happens. And it's on a daily basis that this is happening. And when we start looking and start seeing the evils that are going on here, and this is evil, and that it's sanctioned by a perspective that says this is morality, this is our morality, then how do you resolve it if it's part of your morality? Because morality produces ethics. Ethics produces law. So in Islamic Sharia law, this is allowed. What we're seeing in ISIS, in Islamic Sharia law, is allowed. Because it's part of their moral narrative. It may not necessarily be part of the Quran or the interpretation of the Quran that people are talking about, but it is there. And this is where we can now talk about the psychology of evil and the moral and ethical choices. And where we can use India as this model, because we see that India has a society of evil. They have this society where the morality is pluralistic. That evil morality, evil views can exist openly and not be condemned. They'll have to go to another morality to condemn the thing, but the thing is, while they're condemning the act, the other moralities still exist and say, okay, well, that's okay. And so they have a problem dealing with a lot of these issues, and we'll say this is more. One of the things that we looked at earlier we're talking about the psychology of evil, taking a look at the Philip Zimbardo, the work of Dr. Philip Zimbardo and his work in the infamous Stanford University case. He comes up with this whole thing called the Lucifer effect, how evil spreads throughout society, and how that with the work that Stanley Milgram shows, that a Nazi society can emerge and be very psychopathic, not understand, have the morality skewed to the point where things that are absolutely horrible will occur, and they won't understand that it's wrong. And I said, this is where we can go into quantum psychology and observational psychology and see in history where these things are wrong. And this is where we can go back into Ferguson and look at Ferguson and see what happened in Ferguson and understand that the police weren't simply beating up black people. They were beating up a lot of different people. We'll look around the world, how the police react. The police react in a sense of authority. And that when you have this authority given to them, they act beyond their authority. This authority, and this is what we see in the parable of Republican and the Pharisee, that the Pharisee is supposed to be the good guy because he's not done anything wrong, but the bad guy, the publican, who's a government servant, has done horrible evil. See, the publican has authority. The height here in terms of good and bad wasn't the authority that the person had, but rather the authority within the position of God in terms of Judaism. The Pharisee was a person who did all his fasting, he did all his praying, he did all his tithing, he did everything according to the law the way he was supposed to. The publican took advantage of the law. He went in and he raped, he beat, he took money, he stole. He did a lot of the stuff that was considered to be morally bad. In other words, so the bad person is the one with authority, the good person is the one who is the Pharisee in terms of our standard narrative. The good person stood there and boasted how good I am. He went and listed all the different things he does, the good things he does. The publican goes and apologizes and lists all the bad stuff he's done, realizing that this stuff is wrong, asking and begging for forgiveness. It's the publican who is forgiven, but the person who is boasting, who is self-righteous, is condemned. We see this in the Philip Zimbardo experiment, Dr. Philip in Stanford University. We see that the people in authority who were supposed to be the good guys became the bad guys. We saw this extend out to Abu Ghraib. This is what we saw in Abu Ghraib. And so what happened, when you look at Abu Ghraib, you look at what happened at Stanford, you look at what's going on in Ferguson, it's the same thing. The police shootings, the police dealings with minorities is simply standard police procedure. It's not that they're going against the blacks. It's not racial profile. This is what their procedure is. The procedure is the problem. And again, it's the general procedure that's the problem. And what's happening is that we've seen this effect, this sort of the effect of authority, the evil effect of authority. What it does to a normal person. This person comes into this normal. He's not necessarily, you can't sort of weed this out psychologically. This is what the Stanford University experiment showed. You can't weed this out psychologically. And yet this is something that emerges from the person. And the thing is that because we see this in Ferguson, we see this actually back in India again, we can go back into this whole concept of moral and ethical choices. We can go back and take a look at seeing what's happening in Hollywood. Everyone knows about the casting couch. Everyone knows that Hollywood it does not have the moral standings that what called the Christian right would accept. And so they're called immoral. And the thing we see this with the Bill Cosby rape allegations. We see this with Amy Berg's Open Secret. This is a new Hollywood movie talking about the sex abuse within Hollywood. This can be seen with what happened to Corey Feldman, Corey Haim, the rape of Mackenzie Phillips by her own father. What happened to Britney Spears, what happened with Lindsay Lohan and Jimmy Fallon of SNL. We can see this with Roman Polanski. And once we get back into the open society of YouTube, we see the exact thing happen again with what happened to Geeky Blanc, Morgan Pagelove, and these are the perpetrators like Alex Day, and there's a couple others out there. I can't remember who they are. Their names are not really that important. But we see the same thing happening again. We see the same as we have an open sexual society, a permissive society, and this is what Hollywood is, where they actually don't have any morality at all. These things occur, and the girls wonder why this is happening, why you can't stop it. Because you're allowing it in the first place. One of the things that I read from India was this whole story, and this was a comment from the Indian Times, who wonders what's going to happen next in India, because the rapes they're so bad. And this is one of the articles that I've sort of pulled out of Indian news, and this is sort of brings us a narrative into our last little bit here. It's from an NDTV story, right? I can't pronounce the where it occurred, and I can't pronounce the name. Basically, a 16-year-old girl had 3 abortions, and at the end of the third abortion, she ended up dying. And of course, abortion in India is now legal. That it's a modern socialist state, and so. But the thing is that the hospital was private, and this was back in October. This is just now coming out. This is actually I got the story yesterday. Basically on, I think it was Tuesday, Wednesday, with that night time period there. And it said the reports to find out what happened. And I found out that she had been to several different hospitals. And that this was her third abortion. And she ended up dying after the third abortion. And they found out that for 2 years she had been sexually molested by her school, the headmaster. So again, in India, what happens, if you want to get into a good school, private school, you need help. Because a lot of these people are poor. And of course, you'll have these headmasters, these guys who will say, oh, yes, we'll help you out, but again, they'll expect favors from the student. And this is what happened. And the thing is, they say, oh, the administration didn't know anything about this. Well, here we have, after he retires, the English teacher, who was supposed to be helping her out as well, started having sex with her as well, started molesting her as well. That means the school system knew what was going on. In order for another teacher to do this, there had to be communication between the headmaster and his other teacher. In other words, there was discussion, there was knowledge about what was going on. And it didn't stop until she ended up dying. And then after that, only after there, after it was, you had a protest by this group called AB-VP, and there's a students group, a students union, who went and argued for this. Only then it came into the media. Only then the police started investigating, and they ended up arresting the headmaster and the English teacher. But the thing is that here's what's and they arrested her they arrested them on the charges. They arrested him on the charges for this one girl. But here's what's in the article, right? She attended special classes along with other students, girls, after school. In other words, there was more than one girl. And yet only one girl, after she died, was dealt with. And so what happens is we see this is the open morality. This is what happens in societies where you have pluralistic multiple moralities. And we see that in Toronto School Board. What are they doing? They're doing what was done in Sweden. They're opening bathrooms up to say, well, you can't prevent a person who's transgendered, who has a conceptual view of gender. You can't prevent them from using the bathroom of the church. In other words, a guy can go into a bathroom, to a girl's bathroom, rape a girl, and there's no issue with it. Because why? He's exercising his rights. And this is what actually happens. There are news articles I present that actually does happen to this, who say that, well, this is something, a choice of gender, and that rape is basically a state of mind, and that there's no particular issue here. And this is that narrative actually goes on. And we see this in the Swedish article that I presented, I think last episode, where you have Sweden being proud of its pedophile past, where it's stated that it openly teaches sex education from the ages of 7 years old and up. And this has been since 1956. And we know, if you look into Swedish history and into Dutch history, there are famous, or should I say infamous, child pornography books. There's child pornography movies. And it's done openly in the society. It's accepted as normal. And this is what's happening in Ontario with our Premier, Kathleen Wynne, who is a pedophile. So, well, she's not a pedophile, she doesn't do anything. She's teaching the kids to be sexual. She's grooming them just the way a pedophile would. This is pedophilia. Pedophilia is not necessarily the act, but it's the beginning to teach the person. It's the sexualization of the child. That's pedophilia. It doesn't matter whether you've touched the person or not. And again, this is being viewed as normal. And so we see that evil emerges in society, that morality does matter. But the thing is that what's the solution? How do we resolve this? And this, we need a better understanding. We need more understand the mechanisms that are going on here. And we will do that. We will get into a lot of the mechanisms. And we will try to understand what's going on, why it's going on, and then how to resolve it. We're going to try and actually present a resolution. We're simply not going to just talk about it. Anyways, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. This is the end of this particular episode. I will see you for episode week 50-2. In other words, so that's our Thursday broadcast. Our Thursday broadcast will be, our Thursday episode will be up probably Friday. Just the time of editing and uploading, it usually takes about 10 hours, so it's always about a day late. Anyways, I'll see you then. Take it easy.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian. I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.